Hello, I'm Mark Eberly. Welcome to the Coach One For Me podcast. My guest today is Steve Proctor. Steve is a board member for Golf Brevard, as well as he's going to tell us a little bit about a book he has coming out very soon that he's very excited about. So let's talk to Steve. With me today is Steve Proctor. Steve is a couple of reasons I wanted Steve here today. We're being hosted by Spessard Holland Golf Course, which is managed by Golf Brevard. Steve is a board member for Golf Brevard. And along with that, one of the things that I want to talk to Steve about is he is releasing a book that he's just completed, Monarch of the Green, and we'll get to that as well. But Steve, why don't you just tell us, quickly about your background, not only career-wise, but a little bit of your golf experience as well.
Well, in my career, I was a newspaper editor, and I worked primarily at the Baltimore Sun for 23 years, 10 years also at the San Francisco Chronicle, and a few years at the Houston Chronicle. My job at San Francisco and Houston was managing editor of the newspaper, which is a wonderful and very exciting job to have. I moved to Florida when I retired in 2012, and 2013 it was, and I became involved in the golf scene here, mostly at Spessard Holland. I like to compete when I play golf, and they have really fun, functioning leagues over here that worked really well with my schedule, writing and retirement. So I became involved with the Monday Golf League, and then eventually became the leader of the Monday Golf League, which I've been doing now. This is my third year of leading the Monday Golf League, and I have a great deal of fun with that. And it was through that I first heard about Golf Brevard and their efforts to save the two courses by making a nonprofit corporation. I'd had some experience with that in Baltimore, with the nonprofit taking over the local municipal golf courses, and I thought I had a real chance of success, and so I decided to join Tom Becker in that effort and recruited a number of other members to help out with the steering committee. Awesome. And later the board. Awesome.
I'm guessing the competitiveness in golf could be a little bit of carryover from your career. That sounds like there's probably some stress involved in that job.
Well, anybody who succeeds in journalism has to be an A-type competitive person, just because, not all of journalism, but in the reporting and editing portions of it, because you're such a public person. You're
Right.
constantly going to difficult situations and asking difficult questions and things of that nature. So you have to be a pretty competitive person, and there's no doubt that those things are linked. I've always been hyper-competitive everything I undertake. I expect to win every game I enter, and that's just the nature of who I am.
And did you win them all?
No, but I went down swinging every time I lost. That's for sure.
I want to start by talking a little bit about, because Golf Brevard sponsors our podcast for us, and we love to do that here at Spessard. We hope to do some out at Habitat, sister courses. I want to talk to you just a little bit about Golf Brevard and, what was happening and what's the purpose of Golf Brevard and what you're trying to accomplish.
What was happening was that the county had essentially come to the conclusion that they had to be out of the golf business. They were not, at that time, doing well with the golf courses. They had three: the Savannahs, the Habitat at Valcaria, and Spessard Holland at Melbourne Beach. The Savannahs was a particularly difficult proposition business-wise, and they were losing quite a large sum of money, primarily because of losses at the Savannahs, but increasingly also because of losing propositions at both the Habitat and Spessard. We looked at the situation at Golf Brevard. It was just a group of guys and women who wanted to keep the golf courses alive, because we play most of our golf there, and it's very affordable
Nothing wrong
for
with
people
a little
in retirement.
selfish motive in
Right.
there.
So,
Nothing wrong at all.
And we just felt that these are great golf communities. I've had the privilege of playing golf at municipal courses in San Francisco, in Houston, Texas, Florida, and Maryland, some of the great golfing communities in the nation. And I've never been to a place that had a more wonderful golf community than Spessard Holland does. With
Nice.
people, almost all of my friends in Florida are people that I met here at Spessard Holland.
Oh, wow.
And I feel really committed to keeping it going, mostly because it's such a wonderful community experience for so many people, golf aside. So we got involved for that reason. We simply wanted to keep the courses open. And when we looked at it, we naturally sought out the advice of professionals, and Steve LaMontagne at Suntree helped us a lot just with analysis and looking at it. He's the general manager there, as kindly in his off time. And what we realized was that it was more we felt that we had an opportunity to produce the kind of management that could turn the situation around if it were simply habitat and Spessard. The Savannas is a different challenge. So we put together the nonprofit group. Tom really is the person who did almost everything. Tom Becker led the whole effort. He put together a nonprofit corporation. We got approval from the federal government for a 501(c) corporation. And then we negotiated a contract with the county to run the 3 golf courses at their behest. And it's, off to a wonderful, wonderful start. And fortunately, we always felt that our principal job would be to find the right person to run the golf courses who had the right personality and skills to make this community come back alive. And Mike and you and Gary Evans over at the Habitat have all done such a wonderful job of doing that. And I say that just as a person who comes and plays, leaving aside the fact that I'm on the board. It's just made it a wonderful atmosphere, and you can see such exciting things happening and so much promise for the future. So I'm very, very happy with what's going on and excited to be part of it.
And we talked to Mike a couple of weeks ago, and he joined us on the podcast. So it was nice to hear from Mike and his perspective. But it's always nice to, the perspective from a board member, and then talking about just a player here. The perspectives are always a little different.
Right.
But what's happening is the perspectives tend to line up about where it's going.
It's very simple what people want from a golf course. They want to play on a golf course that's well conditioned, that they can play for a fair price, and that when they go to the golf course, that the atmosphere at the golf course is friendly and welcoming and the food is decent after your round.
Right.
I don't think people have, and that you can play at some respectable number of hours. The thing that has always drawn me to both Spessard and Habitat is extremely terrific pace of play at both places all the time. I've never played a round at Habitat in my entire life that extended more than 4 hours.
Nice.
And Spessard is more of a sporting course, so it's not as long, and it doesn't take more than 3 or 3.5 hours at the absolute outside to play there. So, it's just been a great experience, and our goals really as Golf Brevard is just to preserve these golf courses, and every penny that we make, we plan to put back into the improvement of the courses and their facilities, so that while we're off to a really good start, over time, I think people will be eventually blown away by the things that can be done if we continue to enjoy the level of success that we've seen out of the box here.
Great. Now, just a quick question about your personal experience as a board member. And what that's meant to you as opposed to the big picture and what's happening as far as your participation and what that has meant to you.
Honestly, I've gotten quite a bit out of it. I really have. I felt, I've put a lot of work into it because it's something that, I'm just a person who, if I'm going to commit to something, I'm going to commit to it all the way.
Right.
And I'm going to give it every single thing I have to make sure that it succeeds. And I feel really gratified at the idea that these courses will, in fact, be kept alive, will be made greatly better for the citizens of Brevard County and the people who love golf here. So I feel like I will look back on this someday and think of this as one of the nicer things you did for your community, and I feel really personally very gratified by that.
Nice. And I ask that because I've watched you, and I know it's a big effort, and it's a major commitment to tackle. I mean, there's golf courses all over the country. People aren't looking at and saying, "Hey, let's roll up our sleeves and save them," because it's a big job.
No, when we first, I'll tell you a little story, 2 stories actually. When we first started calling people and asking them for advice, their response was, "Have you lost your mind? You want to take over 2 municipal golf courses? You better go hire Superman." That's what one guy said to us. So just recently I bought Mike a Superman shirt because he has proven, in fact, to be Superman. The other story is that, obviously I run the Monday Golf League and I'm on the board. So that's something that comes up most times that I come to the golf course now.
Right.
And so when we were first got our contract with the county, there was quite a lot of discussion about it in the club, as you might expect. People hopeful but worried. They'd already seen one company get a contract to run the golf courses and not do well with it, if we were being charitable.
Right.
And so one of the stalwart members of the club was quoted in the newspaper as saying he didn't think we could succeed. And then everybody wanted me to be upset with him. And I was like, well, that's a perfectly prudent thinking. This is not anything that's
not off the
going
wall.
to be easy. This is a giant-sized risk from 7 people who have never run a golf course trying to do a startup and hoping for the best with almost no money. And as we learned later, no ability to get money either. So that was just sensible thinking on the part of a real business person that I'll be surprised. Now, I have since heard many, many times from that player about how happy he is with the way things are going, and he is a person who has already made a donation to one of our junior golf efforts and things. So that also is gratifying. Fantastic. To see people who, are prudently skeptical be won over within a period. We haven't even had 6 months yet. So
right.
To be making that kind of progress that quickly is really, really a very hopeful sign, I feel, for the future of the golf courses. And just, when you come here, there are lots and lots of people here having a lot of fun.
Right.
And that is the prescription for success. Right there.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's just I appreciate your input, because we all have different roles and different perspectives, and I observe and watch what people are doing, but I'm always wondering, what are they thinking about that? Are they enjoying it, or is it like, boy, I regret it, or is this more than I thought it was going to be?
Nobody hears more from the golfers at Spessard Holland, at least, than I do. I feel safe in saying, and I hear 99% positive things. The other things, the 1% that I hear, are suggestions for improvement, not what I would call criticisms per se. But obviously, none of us think that we are where we need to be. We just think we're off to a good start. And so most of those suggestions, really what I see people doing is loving what they're seeing and wanting to buy in some way, and how can I do something to help, however small that might be.
Right, sure. Nice. There's something bouncing around in my head, thinking San Francisco and the other places you've been career-wise. What jumps out as your favorite golf course you've played? Because you've probably played a lot of golf courses all over the country.
Yes, I think, I listened to a podcast by George Pepper, the author of Digest for Golf, I think it is, magazine for a while, but he lived in St. Andrews a number of years, and he kept a list of all the golf courses he played, and he played 750. And that made me think, I wonder how many golf courses I've ever played. So being the type of person I am, I naturally started making a list. And I got up to about 127. So yes, I have played quite a lot of golf courses.
One jump out?
Well, I would say obviously St. Andrews is the number one golf course. I played Cypress Point in California. I was very privileged to be taken on there by a person. That's a pretty difficult course to get on, and it's just a magnificent piece of golf architecture. I would say that Royal Dornoch in far northern Scotland, Pebble Beach, those are some of the great ones. But, honestly, my whole life I've been a municipal golfer. I mean, I have the means to have belonged to a club, but I've always preferred to be a municipal golfer. And my favorite municipal course is 2 of them. One is called Glen Eagles, and it's in San Francisco. It's a 9-hole golf course that's kind of slashed into the side of a little hill there. In a tough part of town, and you check in with the bartender, and it was run by a Swedish guy who was pretending to be Scottish, and so they had this massive selection of single malt scotches for $5 a shot in the city of San Francisco, and that was a well-used amenity there.
So I assume the golf course is really busy.
It's a very great golf course, very hard. I think Lee Trevino came out there one day when he was visiting town for the U.S. Open, played the golf course, and went to hoping he could establish a new course record, I guess, or whatever, and he was won over. It's a very hard little course. I liked it. I love that, and I love Spessard. I think, one of the things that gets under my skin is if I hear somebody refer to Spessard as an executive golf course.
Right.
That is, Barefoot Bay, wonderful golf course, is an executive golf course. Spessard Holland is a sporting course. In Scotland, they really break golf down into 2 different categories. One is championship golf, like you play at St. Andrews or Carnoustie, and the other is sporting golf, like you play at Ely. Ely is 16 par 4s and 2 par 3s, or Crail, or places like that are around less than 6,000 yards, as this is. I think this is around 57 and change from the back tee, and often half a dozen par 3s, as this one has. But on this course, the par 3s are probably the most difficult holes to make par on. a number of them in particular,
Absolutely.
especially if you're playing from the back tee. So I love this course. I think it's one of the most scenic courses I've had the opportunity to play. I love to walk along 13, 14, 15 and see the river. And so even if you're playing terrible golf, as is so often the case for anyone who plays this game, you can look out at the river and just tell yourself, enjoy the walking, you know.
Absolutely right. Yeah, it's, you know, early morning, you start out, you can hear the ocean, you know,
yes,
it's
hitting
the
fabulous.
shore.
Walking up the 30,
then
you
get
can see
on the
it.
back nine and you walk down the river and you see the pelicans in the water, dolphins occasionally. I mean, how do you top that?
You know, it's so interesting too, and I think the other thing that people don't realize about this golf course is that because it is tucked on this little island in between the river and the ocean, the wind at this golf course is extremely variable, and so the golf course has lots of different personalities.
Right.
The personality of the golf course from the gold tee in an intensely strong north wind is fearsome. You know, it's very, very difficult. There's a number of holes that a lot of us cannot carry into that kind of a wind over the water that's there. And so it just, but if the wind is blowing from the south or the east or the west and it blows from all of those directions here on a regular basis, you get a different kind of golf course. And it makes for very interesting golf. And it's the reason that Scottish golf started by the seaside, is that the wind is the ultimate protection of every course. And it makes this course very, very challenging for its length.
Right.
I will say right now on the air, any person who wants to come here and bet me $100 that they can play to their handicap from the gold tee the first time, you have a wager.
You're probably right. That's not far off. And I guess we end that discussion by saying, obviously, if you get to the Melbourne Beach area, this is one of the golf courses you want to play.
I think so. I love this golf course. I play it 160 sometimes every year, so I guess that says enough there.
That's a lot of golf. That's good for you. Good for you. There's a lot of jealous people out there, I can guarantee you.
Yes.
Now, let's jump over and talk about something that I know is really important to you right now. The only frustration for me is I went online and I thought I was going to get the book, and it's being pre-sold.
Yes.
I thought I was going to get one, but it still hasn't been released, even though it's being pre-sold. And the book is Monarch of the Green, and it's your work, your creation, and I just want you to share, first of all, what prompted, what was the motivation for it? I think that's important.
Well, you know, I'm a history geek. I have always been a history geek. History was my major in college along with journalism. The two are very much intertwined, I think. So whenever I get interested in a thing, and I've had passionate interest in chess, horse racing, different other things over my lifetime, I usually start by reading up on the history of it. I feel like to understand a thing, you need to understand some of where it comes from and how it evolved to be what it is now. And so I started reading a little bit. And then that made me want to go to St. Andrews, which I guess every golfer ultimately wants to go to St. Andrews, right? So in 2005, I made a trip to St. Andrews just with a friend of mine from the newspaper game. And I went on the little tourist tour of the city of St. Andrews, and that takes you into the cathedral burial grounds. And this is, you know, in the shadow of the ruins of the cathedral, and the luminaries of the cities of St. Andrews have been buried there for hundreds of years. But from any vantage point in that burial ground, the main thing you can see is a giant tomb that takes up one entire wall. And it is the tomb of young Tom Morris. And so I went over to the tomb and was looking at it as anybody would, as a golfer would. And his father, who's, you know, many times more famous than he is got a little plaque underneath. And this tombstone, in addition to an inscription that describes Tommy, the golf hero and beloved figure, the last little line of it says, "This was built with the contributions from 60 golfing societies." Now, I already read enough about history up to that point to realize that that constituted every single golfing society, more or less, of any consequence, that existed when Tommy was alive. And so it put a question in my mind, you know, why would they do that? Everyone who belonged to those clubs were landed gentry and nobles, primarily, or really wealthy merchants. And it was a very strict class system in those days. So what had he done? what had he done to make them want to build this memorial that is so towering? And so I had always wanted to retire early, and I wanted to keep writing. That is the only thing I've ever loved the most in life, is writing. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to write a golf history book, and I was kind of fishing around for a topic, and when I stood in front of that memorial, I realized I have my topic now. I just need to go and do it.
Awesome. That's so you jumped in, and obviously knowing you and a little more about you now, the research started, and you started digging and looking.
Right. Well, you know, I think I have a complex of some kind, because I never feel that I should presume to write about a thing unless I know the thing in its entirety. And that was a little more daunting enterprise with golf than some of the other knuckleheaded projects I've taken on in my time. So I spent about 8 years reading books about golf. So I've read pretty much every book of consequence that's been written about golf since about 1860 or so. And then I sort of felt as if I needed to know it, not just about the history, the events, but so I did separate research on golf architecture and the evolution of golf architecture. I did separate research.
Okay, it's official. I'm now intimidated.
I did separate research on golf instructional books, so I've read pretty much all the golf instructional books that have been written of real consequence, and then also on literature, and I started doing studies in agronomy and things like that, because I felt like you couldn't really understand the quality of a person's play if you didn't really have an intimate understanding of the course that person played on, the clubs that they used. Club making was another area of study. So you would need to understand all those things in order to be able to grasp the subject well enough to have something worth publishing to say on it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It really does. Absolutely.
So then I really felt like I had to get like a master's degree in golf, and that's what I did the first 8 or so years.
People just have to be careful when they ask you a question about golf, because they're going to get an answer.
Well, here's a funny little story. My friend Lee, I was telling, the book is almost coming out, and they described it on the jacket using their own words, not mine, and they said they described it as exhaustively researched. And I said, see, that's the thing I'm most proud of, Lee. Lee Horowitz was a friend of mine who went with me to Scotland. And he sent back a text that said, well, I was certainly exhausted, which I'm sure is how every one of my friends feels. Classic. Completely exhausted by the stories of Tom Morse Jr. since 2005, which is 13 years if we're 14 now if we're counting.
Yeah, I was, again, in pre-orders, I was a little disappointed that I didn't have a chance to preview it and read through it to get a feel for it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I don't know if you were picking a certain aspect of his life or his life in whole or a specific event. Well, what were you going after?
This is a narrative history of his life. So it is
awesome.
A documented history. Nothing in it is, I use no quotes or anything in it that aren't traceable to a person who saw Tommy do what it was that he spoke about.
Wow, good.
And all of it is based on biographies of people from his age, memoirs written by people who played with him, newspaper articles from that era, so forth and so on, original sorts of research. What it tells is the story of his life, which is a short but amazing life, the bigger story is it tells the story of how golf evolved from a cult pastime of Scottish people into a sport that was widely popular in Britain, and because of that, ultimately around the world. Britain at the time obviously had the world's largest empire, and once the sport became popular in Britain in the immediate aftermath of Tommy's life, then it spread to India and to Ireland and to the United States and all over the globe where Britain did business and sent people to do business.
So you were tracing that expansion back to him as far as the process?
Just looking at his life and the impact of his life. He was a player of such towering fame that you couldn't really compare him to any person modern other than, say, Arnold Palmer or Tiger Woods.
Okay.
He was a transcendent player of that level, both skill-wise and also... but really his fame was enormous, and that is one of the things. English papers came out to cover the Open for the first time.
Wow.
Before he started playing in it, but then they started following him everywhere he went and actually writing stories that showed what he did shot by shot and things like that,
wow.
which had never occurred in newspapers in the past. So he had a very transformative effect on the game in multiple ways, and that's what the book tells the story of it. The other ways he really was transforming him was how it was played. because he was born just as the first rubber ball was invented. And before that, you really couldn't use an iron club because the ball was made out of leather and feathers.
Right.
If you hit it with an iron, it would look like you were in a pillow fight, and lost. And he could use irons, and he invented the bump and run shot, and invented that high sailing shot that stops near the hole, and did a lot of other things that transformed not just how the game was played, but the way people wanted to make clubs and everything like that.
Right.
And he sets in motion a lot of changes that continue to reverberate now. I think of him as the first power golfer.
Wow.
Fantastic. Everybody in his age, their whole motto was don't press.
Yeah,
stay within yourself. And he just tried to kill it every time you hit it.
I'll break for a second here. I'm watching Caleb, and if you're hearing any noise in the background, because he's looking and monitoring and doing all that stuff, we have a ladies group in the next room meeting before they tee off, so that's what you're hearing.
That's more fun at Spessard Holland.
We want to take a minute to thank Golf Brevard for sponsoring this week's episode of the Coach One For Me podcast. Golf Brevard is a nonprofit 501c3 managing 2 fantastic golf courses in Brevard County, Florida, Spessard Holland at Melbourne Beach and the Habitat at Valcaria. To find out more information about these 2 courses, visit them online at SpessardHollandGolf.com and thehabitatgolf.com to book your tee times today. Golf Brevard, saving public golf in Brevard County. Now back to the podcast.
Okay, we're just talking a little further about, I was sharing how as a golfer and involved as I've been, we all know about old Tom Morris and young Tom Morris and that story and the history and the legacy of that, but they were always connected. You wouldn't say one without the other. And what you're talking about is you created some separation there.
One of my principal goals with this book was to remove Tommy from the shadow of his father. Tommy died when he was 24 years old. His main artery to his heart burst in his sleep on Christmas Eve. And his father lived to be 87 years old, almost 88. And so his father spanned that first generation of golfers all the way back from 1850s, where Allen Robertson was the famous featherball golfer, all the way up through the turn of the century with Harry Vardon and the whole, and he almost lived to see Francis Ouimet. But so he had a place in the world of golf that's very difficult for any person to match. But it was primarily as a person whose demeanor and character shaped the way that golf, the kind of game golf became, the sort of gentlemanly thing. He contributed an awful lot to that. He was a wonderful golfer himself, but he would be the very first person to tell you that he could not cope with his son. His son was a golfer of an entirely different caliber to him and the other golfers of that age.
Right.
And that part of the story has more or less been, I wouldn't say lost to history, but overlooked. Tommy's performance as a player is really only ever mentioned when somebody almost becomes a major champion at the age of 17. He is still the youngest person ever to win a major championship in golf, and that's pretty much the only time his role as a player is mentioned. And one of the things that I did in this book was, and honestly I got to give credit to my son here, because he read a draft of the book and he said, "Hey, pretty good book, but you don't have any statistics in it. Why would you write a sports book with no statistics?" And I'm like, because getting statistics for something that happened between 1851 and 1875 is a matter of of some difficulty. And he said, "Well, I think you should get golf statistics." So of course, naturally, that nagged at me the way things do. And I decided that, okay, I got to go and document his playing record.
Of course you
did. And that took 2 years to do.
Wow.
Because, it's not like you can just go onto a search engine and type in Tom Morris Jr. and get all the newspaper reports. So I had to hire a professional researcher to help go through the archives in Scotland and find the articles that I needed, and then, actually reread a lot of my own source material with the idea of collating every single mention of his performance.
Right.
So once I did that, it was actually very illuminating. He mostly played in matches, as everybody did in his age, and in singles matches, his record was 75% wins. If he played in a foursome match, usually with his father or another golfer of his age group, he won about 60-some% of those. And overall, his lifetime win percentage is in the high 50s or low 60s. I can't remember the number right off the top of my head, but an astonishing winning percentage, which, you know, by comparison to any golfer that I think you could name in history, with maybe the exception of Bobby Jones in the last 7 years of his life, of his golfing career, I should say, there's not anybody that can match that win percentage, I don't think.
Wow,
And so he, as a player, he has to be ranked with the greatest who've ever played, in my opinion, and that's part of the argument that the book makes. And to separate him as a player from the shadow of his father is one of the principal ideas of the book.
That's fascinating. That really is fascinating. It's just, before I was eager to get it, especially knowing you, I was eager to get it and read it. Now it's like, I think it's like, okay, we can't wait to read it because of what you've created.
Well, I hope people like it. I mean, I think it is a very easy-to-read sort of a story because, you know, it's written the way you would read a narrative tale in a newspaper of something that happened, like a murder mystery or whatever. It's sort of written in that vein, you know, so it's a serious work of scholarship, but not written like a scholarly person, if you understand what I mean.
Good for us,
yes.
right?
So what I wanted to do is to try to do, so that's why I call it a narrative history, because it is a history, a very serious history, and obviously quite a lot of research and work has gone into finding what is the true story so that it can be told in the right way, and so I'm hopeful that people like it.
I'm sure they will. In fact, you know, I'm looking forward to when it's released. Is we're going to set something up at maybe both the clubs and have a book signing and let you share just a little bit about your personal. To me, that's fascinating. Your story about doing it, I mean, really adds so much to the book itself on just a standalone. So to me, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and you know, it's so interesting. Especially, I found one of the most interesting things was reading the instructional books throughout history, because of what's fascinating to me is how little the instruction has changed over time. The fundamentals of the game are all almost identical.
Right.
And you know, and people, the original golf writers like Horace Hutchinson writes a book about strategy and match play. And one of his little quotes in it is, if your opponent is badly bunkered, there is no rule against your standing above him and counting his strokes aloud, with increasing gusto as their number mounts up. But it would be a wise precaution to arm yourself with a niblick before doing so as to meet him on equal terms. So it's not always dull reading. It's kind of fun at times.
It's fascinating. But now I'm like I said, I'm now really eager to see it because I think it's going to be fun to read it. And I think I can put in perspective what you're talking about as far as an easy read. Coming from your background, you know how to present that information to people, sifting through it to make sure they're not reading an encyclopedia, but something that they can enjoy reading.
That's what I hope. You know, I feel like the one thing I can, you know, I have the discipline of a historian and also of a journalist, but I have the everyday writing skill that you would attribute to newspaper journalism, where it has to be something that most anybody could read. And so I'm hoping that's what I accomplished here. And I do think that whatever people think, they will learn an awful lot about the history of the game that they had no idea was true. I think most people,
that has a lot of value,
as far as they're
too.
concerned, history begins with Arnold Palmer, and obviously he's you know, one of the biggest transformative figures ever in golf. But the history of golf stretches out 400 years before Arnold ever picked up a golf club. And there's a lot that happened that's fascinating and amazing. And performances that happened that I think could be ranked with any performance. If I could for 1 second, I want to talk about Tommy's performance in winning the Open Championship in 1870.
Go for it.
He shoots 149 for 36 holes, okay? That's 74-75 if you're translating it to 18-hole rounds. Prestwick was a 12-hole golf course, and you went around it 3 separate times to play the 36 holes that constituted the Open Championship. So try to wrap your mind around that for a second. He has 6 golf clubs or 7 golf clubs. They're incredibly primitive. There's no scoring on the face of the club. They're all smooth-faced if they're irons. Nobody had ever thought of that yet. He's playing with a ball that flies maximum 200 yards if you absolutely crush it, maybe rolls a little bit longer than that. And, you know, he's playing a golf course that is so rugged compared to what we play today that I don't think a modern golfer can quite wrap their mind around it.
Right.
It's the bunkers are never raked. There is no such thing as a bunker rake. Wherever your ball goes, it goes. The greens, the mower has yet to be invented, so to be able to produce that score on that golf course, and probably played in a very fierce wind most of the time as well, is something that I just think of as I'd be hard-pressed to name around to match that. And the proof of it is that the British Open was held for 22 more years at 36 holes. And during that 22 years, a brand new ball that flew way farther was invented. The mower was invented. Vast improvements were made to clubs, and yet that score was never equaled for 22 years. So it just shows you that there's so many things in history that people completely forget, and they would dismiss as insignificant, when in fact, the winning score would normally be around 85 when he shot to 74.
Yeah. Well,
the guy in second was 12 strokes
definitely
behind.
gives it definition, and because I know we're all guilty in every sport of the most recent star is the greatest.
Right.
We're all guilty of that.
Yes.
And it's just, that's a perfect example. I don't think anyone ever today thinks of, young Tom Morris as a great golfer. He's seen as a historical golfer.
Right, and what I want people to think of him
mistake.
as one of the immortals, because I think his records, it defines him as one of the immortals. And the way I look at it is there's only one way to judge whether you're immortal. Did you stand astride the generation in which you played? That's the only way to compare one person to another over time. So the way I look at the history of golf is there are exactly 6 people who fit into that category. Tom Morris Jr., Harry Vardon, Ben Hogan, Bobby Jones, Jack Nicklaus, and Tiger Woods. And that's everybody. Arnold is in a different category. He wasn't quite the player that Jack Nicklaus was, but his impact on the game as a personality and his arrival at the time people first got television had such an enormous impact as to be vastly outsized as compared to his very considerable skills as a player. Right. But I think Hogan is a better golfer than him, and Nicklaus was a better golfer than him.
I can tell from what you've presented today, I can't imagine anyone watching this podcast and not saying, I really want that book. I mean, because you've added so much to it, so much definition, and I think it's going to raise the interest level. And one is, I'm sitting here thinking, this is pretty neat, and I want to read it now. And it's like before, it's like I wanted to read it, but now it's like, this is because I think this is good for golf, that we do understand that history, because it adds so much to the game that we play today that has been forgotten and left behind.
I really feel that way. I feel like a person who understands how the game evolves is likely to enjoy playing it more, and that's certainly been true in my case. The book publishes April 11th in Edinburgh, Scotland, which I'm particularly happy that it's being published in the home of golf. And I believe if you pre-order it on Amazon, it arrives here April 25th.
Okay, great. And plus, I'm thinking I can still go out there, and when I hit a drive 230 yards, I just hit it past young Tom Morris.
Yeah, that was Tommy-like. That's what I say to myself all the time.
So you hit a lot of those tee shots too?
Yeah, that one went 210, baby. That was Tommy-like.
I got him. Well, again, I really appreciate you joining. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. Just the information you've given us. So, Steve, thanks for being here. Make sure you get the book. It's on Amazon, right?
Yes, it's on Amazon in the pre-order section. Monarch of the Green.
Monarch of the Green.
Anybody who wants to bring it into Spessard Holland, I am happy to sign it for you.
And watch all of our outlets, because we are going to do a book signing, and hopefully everyone will get to hear more of this. And I'm sure there's probably a couple of more stories up there you haven't shared.
There's one or two. Everybody will be exhausted.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Yep.
Good job. Thanks, Steve, for joining us today and all the information he provided. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. For further information on Steve's book, upcoming podcasts, and other information, just go over to coach1forme.com/podcast. I'm Mark Eberly, and this is the Coach One for Me podcast.